Russian forces are tonight being met with stiff resistance from Ukraine as the nation puts up one hell of a fight against Vladimir Putin. But their heroic efforts stand in stark contrast to those of the rest of the world. The reality is the Russian president has spent almost a decade preparing for this, and he knows there's very little the West can do right now to stop him. They talk a big game.
It's unprovoked.
It is coercion.
It's a premeditated attack.
And it's unacceptable.
Russia needs to stand down.
Back away from the brink.
There are consequences.
There must be a cost.
Nothing is off the table.
United in condemnation, the Western democratic world versus Russia. All this chest beating could make you think the deck is stacked against Vladimir Putin. But actually, Russia has a pretty strong hand to play. And boy, don't they know it. Gas, Putin's trump card. Europe is dependent on Russia for 40% of its natural gas needs. And while Germany may have halted the new Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, there's no simple replacement for the huge quantities of gas Europe gets from Russia. Most of it through Ukraine. And it doesn't end there. Seizing Ukraine means seizing its strongest cards too. Sometimes called the breadbasket of Europe, exercising control over Ukraine would see Putin control 30% of global wheat exports and 20% of corn exports. That's a lot of people and a lot of countries eating out of Putin's hand.
We could see not only oil and energy prices go up, but also food prices going up as a result of any disruptions that take place. And they're going to try to exploit to the maximum ability their comparative advantages over those exports of critical resources.
The cards the rest of the world has at its disposal to fight back with at this point are limited. And Putin knows that too.
This is really a game of chicken here. And he's gambling on the fact that the West will only go so far and no further, that they're going to target the low-hanging fruit, but not really go for the jugular.
Hitting Russia hard would involve ejecting it from the SWIFT international payment system.
Now, SWIFT is like the trump card in the global financial system. If you freeze Russia and Russian entities and banks from SWIFT, you essentially cut off Russia's supply to global financial markets.
Today, the European Union and its Western allies agreed to cut selected Russian banks from SWIFT and place restrictions on Russia's central bank, limiting its ability to support the ruble. But it's a battle to get everyone on board to go the whole way.
Russia is gambling on the fact that the costs of any sanctions and punitive measures on Russia by the West will be unevenly distributed. So he's hoping to exploit divisions.
Cutting Russia off from SWIFT could also have unintended consequences, with fears Russia could join forces with China in setting up a rival system, bypassing the US dollar altogether.
Russia and China are closer than they have been for many, many decades, and that empowers Putin. It gives him a plan B if and when he's cut off of Western markets.
And it's the West's fear of a rising China which is giving Putin space to do what he wants in Ukraine. Part of America's caution in responding to Russia is that it needs to keep its powder dry in case of a showdown with the other superpower.
Russia chose its timing exceptionally well. It basically thought this is the moment to strike. The Americans are going to be unwilling to retaliate, certainly in military terms, and they were right. And we can get away with a lot more than we could in the past.
Which brings us to that other ace card Putin has to play. He's a master of creating and exploiting division. And the West is already divided when it comes to confrontation. After decades of costly and ultimately unsuccessful American-led wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the US has just elected its third president in a row who's promised to end foreign wars, not engage in new ones.
It's time for American troops to come home.
And while America's hands are somewhat tied, Putin doesn't even play by the same set of rules, so isn't constrained in the same way.
I think he knows full well that Russia will never dominate the world, but it can disrupt the West.
The West has believed for decades that by upholding values like
The rule of international law,
Democracy,
Freedom.
you could gradually roll back the old world and the values represented by Russia. What Putin is demonstrating now is that liberal values and ideas may be no match for the hard realities of military might.
I think we've consistently underestimated Putin, and that is one of the reasons why he is so vexed and so keen to prove himself as a destructive force. We've underestimated Putin's risk appetite, his willingness to disrupt and revise history, and to our detriment.
so dangerous when you are opposing someone who is all about high risk, high reward, because you have these conversations from other global leaders talking about things that seem like taking a knife to a gunfight. You know, and I don't understand how that's going to do anything to Putin, because he seems like the type of person that's just like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to prove that I'm right. And that's dangerous.
He also doesn't have to keep and hold Ukraine forever in order to be successful. He just has to disrupt. And the damage that can do to the rest of the world if it doesn't respond adequately is enormous.
What's been really impressive, though, is the Ukrainian spirit and Zelensky's courage in staying there and putting out those social media videos that are obviously inspiring the people.